Your soulmate is crying over a secret they never wanted you to know. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Sometimes the deepest tears are never witnessed by another soul. They fall quietly in the middle of an ordinary night, after the lights have been turned off and the world believes everything is fine. There are moments when a person smiles through an entire day, laughs at the right times, answers every question with, "I'm okay," and still returns home carrying a burden so heavy that words refuse to describe it. Somewhere tonight, the person you love is sitting alone with thoughts they have hidden for far too long. It isn't because they don't trust you. It isn't because they don't care. It's because some secrets are born from fear rather than dishonesty. Some truths become difficult to speak when someone worries they might change the way they are seen. Last night became one of those nights. A memory they tried to bury quietly returned. An old regret gently knocked on the door of their heart. Before they realized it, tears had begun falling, not because they had given up, but because holding everything inside had finally become impossible. The room was silent. Only the soft sound of rain touched the window. A lamp in the corner filled the room with warm golden light. Everything around them looked peaceful. Inside their heart, a storm quietly continued. Your future soulmate sat on the edge of the bed. Their hands rested in their lap. A small notebook lay beside them. For several minutes they simply stared at its empty pages. There were 1,000 thoughts inside their mind. None of them felt easy to explain. They whispered to themselves, "Maybe it's better if nobody ever knows." The words disappeared into the quiet room. No one answered. Only silence remained. Perhaps if your future soulmate could place an invisible letter into your hands tonight, it would begin like this. There is something I've carried for a long time. Every time I think about telling you, I stop myself before the first sentence even forms. Not because I believe you would judge me. Because I'm afraid you'll see me differently. I've imagined this conversation so many times that I no longer know which version is real. Tonight I finally realized that hiding the truth has become more painful than remembering it. They slowly reached for the notebook. The pen rested between trembling fingers. After several deep breaths, they finally wrote. Some secrets don't stay hidden because they're shameful. They stay hidden because they were born during seasons when we believed we had to survive alone. They stopped writing. A tear quietly landed on the page. The ink blurred slightly. For a long moment they simply watched it. That tiny mark somehow reflected everything they had been carrying. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, another memory quietly returned. Not a dramatic memory. Not one anyone else would notice. Just a conversation from years ago. Words spoken carelessly. A moment they wished they could rewrite. Ever since then, they had quietly promised themselves they would never allow another person to see that vulnerable part of their heart. Then you entered their life. Without trying. Without forcing anything. Your kindness slowly began reaching places they believed would remain closed forever. That frightened them. Not because kindness was dangerous. Because hope required trust. And trust always asks us to become vulnerable. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Sometimes the people who matter most make us want to tell the truth. At the very same time, they become the people we're most afraid of disappointing. Your future soulmate understood that feeling all too well. The following morning arrived quietly. Sunlight slowly replaced the rain. Birds greeted another ordinary day. Neighbors walked outside carrying coffee cups. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet your future soulmate carried swollen eyes hidden behind a gentle smile. No one asked why they looked tired. No one noticed the notebook now resting inside a drawer. Some battles remain invisible. They prepared breakfast, answered messages, completed ordinary tasks. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual. Inside, every thought eventually returned to one question. What if they knew? That question followed them throughout the day. While walking through familiar streets, while waiting at a traffic light, while standing in line for coffee, every ordinary moment became another opportunity to wonder whether the truth should remain hidden forever. Eventually they wandered toward the familiar park. The old oak tree welcomed another peaceful afternoon. Children laughed across the playground. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves. Everything reflected calmness. They found the familiar wooden bench, sat quietly, closed their eyes. The tears from last night had disappeared. The emotions had not. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. I keep asking myself whether secrets truly protect us. For a long time I believed they did. I thought silence would keep everyone safe. But now I'm beginning to wonder if silence simply keeps loneliness alive. The hardest part isn't remembering what happened. The hardest part is wondering whether you'll still recognize me after knowing every chapter of my story. Those words stayed with them long after they imagined writing them. Perhaps they weren't ready to say them aloud. But they were finally honest enough to admit them to themselves. As afternoon slowly became evening, they wandered toward the little bookstore that had quietly become a place of reflection. The owner greeted them warmly. You seem thoughtful today. They smiled politely. I've been carrying something. The owner nodded gently. We all carry something. They looked down. I just don't know when to put it down. The owner remained quiet for a moment before speaking. The heaviest burdens usually become lighter the moment they stop being carried alone. Those simple words quietly settled inside their heart. Walking through the shelves, they found a small book resting near the window. Opening it at random, one sentence immediately caught their attention. True courage begins where hiding ends. They stood perfectly still, reading it once, then again. Life seemed to whisper the same lesson from every direction. Leaving the bookstore, they carried nothing except another quiet reminder. Golden evening light stretched across the sidewalks. Returning home, they opened the notebook once more. This time the words arrived more easily. I've spent too much of my life believing my past deserved silence. Tonight I'm beginning to believe that healing begins the moment someone finally feels safe enough to tell the truth. Maybe my secret doesn't define who I am. Maybe it's simply one chapter in a story that's still being written. The page slowly filled. Every sentence reflected honesty. Every paragraph reflected hope beginning to replace fear. Before this first chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand something important. The tears I cried weren't tears of defeat. They were tears from carrying something for far too long. Every time I imagined telling you the truth, I became afraid that one difficult chapter might become the only chapter you would see. I forgot that genuine understanding begins when two people trust each other enough to stop pretending they have lived perfect lives. Wherever you are tonight, please know that my silence has never been a measure of how much you matter. If anything, it has existed because you matter so much that I became afraid of losing the peace your presence brings into my life. I don't know exactly when I'll find the courage to tell you everything, but last night changed something inside me. For the first time, I stopped asking whether my secret should stay hidden forever and started asking whether healing is possible without honesty. Perhaps every meaningful journey begins with one difficult truth spoken gently. Perhaps every lasting connection is built not upon perfection, but upon the courage to let another person see the parts of us we've spent years trying to hide. And perhaps, if that day finally comes, you'll discover that behind every tear was never someone asking for pity. Only someone quietly hoping to be understood. Night slowly embraced the neighborhood once again. Moonlight rested softly across the closed notebook beside the open window, illuminating pages that held the beginning of a truth no longer willing to remain buried. Standing beneath the quiet stars, your future soulmate wiped away one final tear and breathed deeply. The secret was still theirs to carry, but for the first time, hope had become stronger than fear. Somewhere beyond this peaceful night, another chapter quietly waited, one where silence would slowly give way to honesty, and where healing would begin not through perfection, but through the simple courage to finally be seen. Morning arrived quietly after another restless night, but the tears your future soulmate had cried were not simply left behind with the darkness. They carried them into the new day, hidden beneath a gentle smile that no one questioned. The sunlight slowly filled the room, painting soft golden lines across the floor as birds welcomed another ordinary morning. Outside, the neighborhood awakened to familiar routines. Cars rolled down quiet streets. Neighbors greeted one another with warm smiles. Someone watered flowers on a nearby porch. Life moved forward as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet inside your future soulmate's heart, every thought still returned to the same secret they had spent so many years protecting. They wondered how something so invisible could feel so heavy. They wondered how one hidden chapter could quietly influence every conversation, every decision, and every hopeful dream. Most of all, they wondered whether the truth they feared would one day become the very thing that finally set them free. The notebook still rested inside the drawer. They reached for it slowly. Their hands hesitated. Not because they didn't know what to write. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. After taking a deep breath, they opened to a fresh page. The pen touched the paper. The words came quietly. I've spent years believing silence was protecting everyone around me. Today I'm beginning to wonder if silence has only protected my fear. Every day I carry this secret, it quietly changes the way I see myself. Perhaps the truth isn't waiting to hurt me. Perhaps it's waiting to heal me. They stopped writing. Read every word again. A quiet tear slipped down their cheek. This time they didn't wipe it away immediately. Instead, they allowed themselves to feel everything they had spent years trying to avoid. Perhaps if your future soulmate continued the invisible letter resting quietly inside their heart, today's page would begin like this. There are moments when I almost tell you everything. I imagine sitting across from you while the world grows quiet around us. I imagine finally explaining why certain memories still make my voice tremble. Then fear quietly reminds me of everything that could change. I become afraid that you'll stop seeing the person I've become and only remember the chapter I've tried so hard to leave behind. The morning slowly unfolded. They prepared breakfast. Answered a few messages. Tried reading a book. Nothing held their attention. Every few minutes their thoughts quietly wandered back toward the same question. What if they knew? The question wasn't new. It had followed them for years. Today it sounded different. Less like fear. More like curiosity. Perhaps they were becoming tired of hiding. Perhaps the heart eventually reaches a moment when honesty begins to feel safer than silence. After lunch they stepped outside. Fresh air usually helped clear their thoughts. Today it simply gave those thoughts more room to breathe. The familiar streets welcomed another peaceful afternoon. Children laughed while riding bicycles. An elderly couple walked hand in hand beneath tall trees. A musician played a gentle melody from a nearby corner. Everything around them reflected ordinary happiness. They slowly wandered toward the familiar park. The old oak tree stood exactly where it always had. The wooden bench waited beneath its shade. They sat down quietly. Closed their eyes. Instead of remembering the tears from the previous night, another memory gently surfaced. It was a much younger version of themselves. Someone carrying impossible expectations. Someone believing mistakes could never be forgiven. Someone convinced that vulnerability always led to disappointment. Looking back now, they felt something unexpected. Compassion. Not shame. For years they had judged that younger version of themselves. Today they simply wanted to comfort them. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the person we used to be. Yet healing often begins the moment we stop treating our younger selves like enemies. Your future soulmate slowly opened their eyes. The breeze moved gently through the leaves overhead. Everything around them whispered the same quiet invitation. Be kinder to yourself. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. I've realized something important today. The secret I've been carrying isn't the only thing making me cry. I'm grieving the years I spent believing I wasn't worthy of understanding. I became so focused on hiding one painful chapter that I forgot my life contains countless beautiful ones too. Those words remained with them long after they imagined writing them. As the afternoon slowly turned toward evening, they wandered toward the little bookstore that had quietly become part of this journey. The owner smiled warmly as they entered. You look lighter today. They laughed softly. I don't think the burden is smaller. No? I think I'm just finally admitting that I'm carrying it. The owner nodded thoughtfully. Naming a burden is often the first step toward putting it down. Those simple words echoed quietly inside their heart. Walking between the shelves, they paused near the familiar window. A small hardcover book rested nearby. Opening it at random, one sentence immediately caught their attention. The truth rarely asks us to become perfect before it sets us free. They stood still, reading it again. Then once more. Life seemed determined to repeat the same lesson until they truly believed it. They gently closed the book. No purchase was necessary. The message had already found its place inside them. Leaving the bookstore, they carried only another quiet reminder. Golden evening light stretched across the sidewalks. Returning home, they opened the notebook once again. This time there was no hesitation. I don't know when I'll be ready to tell you everything. But I know this. Every day I choose honesty with myself, fear loses a little more of its power. Maybe courage doesn't arrive all at once. Maybe it grows quietly every time we stop running from our own story. The page slowly filled. Every sentence reflected acceptance. Every paragraph reflected hope. For the first time, they noticed something surprising. The secret itself hadn't changed. They had. The person carrying it had become gentler. Kinder. More patient. That quiet transformation mattered more than they realized. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why my tears continue to return. They aren't asking for sympathy. They are releasing years of silence that no longer belong inside me. For so long I believed one hidden chapter could erase everything good about the person I've become. But lately I've begun seeing my story differently. I am not the worst day I've ever lived through. I am not the mistake I still remember before falling asleep. I am every lesson I learned afterward. I am every act of kindness I chose despite my fears. I am every morning I found the strength to begin again. And somehow, when I think about you, I imagine a future where I no longer have to hide behind carefully chosen words. I imagine conversations built on honesty instead of fear. I imagine finally believing that being understood is possible. Wherever you are tonight, please know that my silence has never measured the depth of my feelings. It has only measured the depth of my uncertainty. If tomorrow gives me another opportunity to become a little braver, I hope I take it. Because after everything I've reflected on these past few days, I finally believe that genuine connection isn't created by pretending we've never been broken. It grows when two imperfect hearts trust each other enough to stop pretending they have nothing to heal. Night slowly settled across the neighborhood once again. Moonlight rested softly upon the notebook beside the open window, illuminating pages that no longer carried only hidden pain but also quiet courage. Your future soulmate stood beneath the endless stars, breathing deeply as peace slowly replaced fear. The secret had not yet been spoken aloud, but something important had already changed. They were no longer asking whether the truth deserved to exist. They were beginning to believe that they deserved to be loved with the truth included. And somewhere beyond this peaceful night, another chapter patiently waited, one where courage would continue growing, one honest heartbeat at a time. Another quiet sunrise arrived, and for the first time in many years, your future soulmate noticed something had begun to change inside them. The secret they had carried was still there, but it no longer felt like an unbreakable chain wrapped around their heart. It had become something different. It had become a story waiting for the right moment to be told instead of a burden that demanded lifelong silence. As soft golden light slipped through the bedroom window, they stood quietly watching the world awaken. Birds gathered on nearby branches. The breeze gently moved the curtains. A neighbor walked a dog along the peaceful street. Everything outside followed its ordinary rhythm, yet inside them another quiet transformation had begun. They realized that healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes through countless small moments when we decide to stop running from ourselves. The notebook remained beside the window. Its pages no longer frightened them. They had become companions. A place where honesty could exist before it was spoken aloud. They opened to another blank page. Without hesitation, they began writing. Today I noticed something I never expected. I thought my secret was becoming smaller. It isn't. I'm simply becoming stronger. The truth hasn't changed. The way I carry it has. They paused. A peaceful smile crossed their face. Those words felt different. Not hopeful because they ignored reality. Hopeful because they finally accepted it. Perhaps if your future soulmate continued the invisible letter resting quietly inside their heart, today's page would begin like this. I've spent so much time worrying about the day you might learn everything. I imagined disappointment. Distance. Silence. But lately another possibility has quietly entered my thoughts. What if understanding is stronger than fear? What if kindness is greater than the story I've been telling myself for years? That question remained with them all morning. It wasn't demanding an answer. It simply invited them to think differently. After breakfast they stepped outside. The cool morning air filled their lungs. Everything felt fresh. They walked slowly through familiar streets where ordinary life unfolded around them. A father helped his daughter learn to ride a bicycle. Friends laughed together outside a small cafe. Someone held the door open for a stranger. Tiny moments of kindness seemed to appear everywhere. Watching those ordinary gestures reminded your future soulmate of something beautiful. Most people carry invisible stories. Yet they continue choosing kindness. Perhaps that is why kindness matters so much. We never truly know what another person is carrying. Eventually they reached the familiar park. The old oak tree welcomed another peaceful day. Sunlight danced through its branches. Children chased one another across the grass. An elderly woman quietly read beneath the shade. Everything looked wonderfully ordinary. They found the familiar wooden bench. Sat down. Closed their eyes. Instead of remembering the night they cried, another memory quietly surfaced. It was the first time they met you. Nothing extraordinary had happened. There had been no dramatic music. No impossible coincidence. Just an ordinary conversation. Yet something about your presence had stayed with them. Not because you asked perfect questions. Because you listened. That memory warmed their heart. Perhaps that had been the beginning. Long before they realized it. Long before the secret became difficult to carry. Long before fear convinced them silence was safer. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Sometimes we remember the people who made us feel heard long before we understand why they became unforgettable. Your future soulmate slowly opened their eyes. The answer had always been there. You represented safety. That was why the truth mattered so much. If the invisible letter continued, perhaps another page would read like this. I've realized that I never feared telling the truth itself. I feared losing the peace your presence brings into my life. Somewhere along the way I convinced myself that if you knew everything, the kindness in your eyes might disappear. Today I'm beginning to wonder if that fear belongs to an older version of me rather than the person I am becoming. Those words echoed gently inside their heart. The afternoon slowly unfolded. Still thinking, they wandered toward the familiar bookstore. The owner greeted them warmly. You seem calmer today. They smiled. I think I'm finally listening to myself. The owner nodded. That's usually where healing begins. Walking quietly through the shelves, they paused beside the same window where so many unexpected lessons had found them. One small book rested nearby. Opening it to a random page, they found another sentence that seemed perfectly timed. Shame survives in silence. Compassion begins when the truth is welcomed into the light. They stood still, reading the words again. Then once more. A deep breath escaped their lungs. It felt as though life had been gently repeating the same message for days. Not to rush. Not to hide forever. Simply to keep moving toward honesty. Leaving the bookstore, they carried no book. Only another quiet reminder. Golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the sidewalks as they walked home. The neighborhood looked peaceful. For the first time in years, they realized peace wasn't something waiting in the future. Small pieces of it already lived inside the present. Returning home, they opened the notebook once more. The words flowed naturally. I used to believe my story was divided into two parts. The chapter 1 wanted everyone to see and the chapter 1 hoped nobody would ever discover. Today I'm beginning to understand that both chapters belong to the same person. Neither can erase the other. Together they tell the truth about how I became who I am. They read those words carefully. Then gently nodded. They finally sounded honest. Not polished. Not perfect. Simply honest. The evening slowly settled across the neighborhood. The sky transformed into soft shades of orange, lavender, and deep blue. Standing beside the open window, they watched the first stars quietly appear. Those stars had witnessed countless nights of silent tears. Tonight they witnessed something different. Acceptance. Not because every fear had disappeared. Because fear was no longer making every decision. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page inside the invisible letter resting gently within your heart. If somehow these words find you tonight, I hope you understand why this journey has mattered so much to me. I cried because I believed one hidden chapter could define my entire life. I stayed silent because I convinced myself that being fully known meant risking everything I cared about. But over these quiet days something beautiful has begun changing inside me. I'm starting to see myself with the same compassion I have always offered everyone else. I'm beginning to believe that my past deserves understanding instead of endless punishment. When I think about you now, I no longer imagine only the moment you might hear my story. I imagine the possibility of finally putting down the weight I've carried alone for so long. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember that every heart has chapters it struggles to read aloud. Be gentle with your own story. Be patient with your own healing. If tomorrow asks me to become a little braver than I was yesterday, I want to say yes. Not because courage feels easy, but because hope has finally become louder than fear. After everything these quiet days have taught me, I now believe that the strongest relationships are not built on pretending we've never been wounded. They are built when two people choose honesty, grace, and compassion over judgment. And maybe, just maybe, that's where real freedom begins. Night gently embraced the neighborhood as your future soulmate closed the notebook and carefully placed it back beside the window where moonlight rested across its worn cover. Looking toward the endless sky, they smiled through eyes that no longer carried only sadness but also quiet hope. The secret had not yet been spoken, but the fear surrounding it had begun to lose its grip. Their heart no longer dreamed only of hiding. It dreamed of healing. And somewhere beyond the peaceful horizon, another chapter patiently waited, a chapter where courage would continue growing, one gentle truth, one quiet sunrise, and one hopeful heartbeat at a time.